Well, hello, everybody. This is the third episode in our series, my series on Machines Don't Laugh, which is named after my book. Welcome to The Cross to Bear. That's the podcast name. And I am honored to have my one of my favorite guests. Actually, he's only one of two guests that I've had so far, but he's absolutely a great guy. I love talking to him. He has a very genuine and tender heart. Want to introduce to you um, my friend, the Fathiest Atheist. Um, and what I want to do is I know I do this every time, um, and I'm probably you probably get sick of this, but just do me a favor and introduce yourself real quick, just for people who are not familiar with you or haven't heard from you before, and then I'll start laying some groundwork for our episode and discussion today. So take it away and give us your name and rank and serial number and background and what your worldview is all about and everything. So,
Okay. Hey, thanks for having me on again, Phil. This is our third time talking. And first of all, I want to say nice guitar work on your intro. I like listening to your intro, and I know that's you on the guitar there. So just want to say I appreciate that music. That was well done.
yeah, thank you. I've been asked that question actually quite a bit, and it's actually not just the guitar; all the instruments on that recording
Wow.
are me. Uh,
Well done.
Yeah, that's a composition. It's an original composition called "Out of the Silent Planet."
Okay,
And
from the Ransom trilogy.
yes, right, that's right. The
Yeah.
Ransom Trilogy by C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
I have another song called "Paralandra."
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. That would
But I,
fit in. That would
but
align.
for some reason, I just haven't been motivated to write a song called "That Hideous Strength."
That's a more difficult one to get through. Yeah, the third one's the hardest one to get through, I think.
Yeah, yeah. So, well, thanks.
Oh,
I appreciate the compliments. I didn't want
sure.
to hunt around for just some any music. I wanted to make this all my own. So I thought I'd include that. And you know, so
That's awesome. So yeah, I'm the Fathiest Atheist. You can call me Richard. I was born and raised Southern Baptist. I probably walked away in my low 20s, and so I'm in my low 50s now, and maybe close to mid 50s now. So 30 years of non-belief, but I'm not an enemy of Christianity. I just think some arguments are better than others. And my biggest part of my atheist ministry, I'll use the word ministry, is more to pull people back from being so angry. There's just a lot of dehumanization going on out there. And I work in the counterterrorism field, as you know, so I try to be an anti-terrorist and try to push back against this dehumanization mindset, which your viewers probably have seen a lot of. So I try to go the other way with it. And case in point, I'll hang out with Christians like you, and we'll talk respectfully about our different views.
yeah, great. Yeah, I can't just say this enough. I've said it before. I think I say it on every single one of these episodes with you. Um, it means a great deal to me that you are not an enemy of Christianity, because uh, it seems like there are so many non-believers who call themselves atheists, and they're not only enemies of Christianity, but they are deliberately enemies of Christianity. I mean, it seems to me that that's their agenda, is to be an
It
enemy of
is.
Christianity.
Is their religion.
It is, and
Mhm.
they don't like it when we point that out. That
Right. They don't.
because their definition of religion is to believe something without evidence by faith,
Right.
and so I have pointed out on several occasions that atheists believe several of their key principles without evidence, by faith without evidence. And if that's the definition of religion, then they have to come to face with the fact that they are just as religious as they accuse of us of being, Christians of being.
Right.
So let's all just get that out of the way up front. We're all
Right.
religious.
We all have sacred things, and I use the word sacred to mean like inviolable, inviolable. It's something that is just you can't mess with. We all have that, and so there's a lot of anti-theists, who will say we've got to get rid of religion. That's their sacred thing. Is the sacred utopia will be a world where no one's religious, but that's an ideal. And it's probably not feasible given how our species is. So. I say we all have something sacred. We all can't demonstrate everything that's sacred to us. And I will say that the people who hate Christianity or enemies of it, they've just stacked up all the bad stuff. And there's content. You guys are a 2,000-year-old religion. You're the dominant religion in the world right now. So there's stuff there. If someone wants to become an anti-Christian, there's content available for them that they can find. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Christianity has to go away or that it will go away. But that's where their mind is. Their mind is to stack up all that content and then throw it at you guys and try to shame you out of existence, which doesn't work. Historically, that doesn't work.
Right.
But that's where their mind is.
Yeah, I gave a talk one time about the evidence for the Christian faith and the evidence for the reliability of the New Testament. And we should have Dr. Craig Blomberg on sometime. He's been a lifelong friend of mine.
Mm-hmm.
And he wrote a book called The Historical Reliability of the Gospels.
Okay.
And when I gave that talk, I started out with a little story about a thief who breaks into this high scale Midwestern Chicago home and starts filling this black bag, full of things out of the safe and that kind of thing. And he hears this voice that says, "I see you, and Jesus sees you." And he's kind of shocked, and he looks around, and he's got a flashlight, and he looks around and he points a flashlight around the room, and he can't really see anything, doesn't know where this voice is coming from. So he finally just blows it off and continues to fill his bag.
Mm-hmm.
And then again, he hears a voice that says, "I see you, and Jesus sees you." And again, he's shocked. He turns around, he looks around, he can't see anything, he can't find anything in the room. And so he's still nervous, but he continues to fill his bag, full of stuff that he's stealing from this house. And then a third time he hears a voice, "I see you, and Jesus sees you." And he finally turns around and he picks up this lamp, this lantern that he's got, this battery powered lantern that lights up the whole room. And he turns that thing on, and finally he's able to see a cage with a parrot in it. And the parrot says, "I see you, and Jesus sees you." And he says, "Oh, it's just a parrot." So, but then after closer inspection, he finally realizes that in kind of the dim light that there is an enormous Doberman pinscher standing right below the parrot cage.
Yeah.
And as soon as he sees that Doberman pinscher, the parrot says, "Sick him, Jesus."
That's great.
And so my point in telling that little joke is that Christianity has teeth. It's not just a vacuous religion that people expect everyone to just simply believe by blind faith. And I think that you're willing to to admit that Christianity does have teeth. There is evidence. We're not just demanding that everybody believe everything that we say and everything about our religion just because, that there is a reasonable faith that exists in this. And
Mm-hmm.
I have seen you acknowledge that, and I admire you greatly for acknowledging that. Now, you don't think that that the evidence is strong enough. I think that's probably
Right.
a fair thing to say.
That's right.
But on the other hand, you're not just refusing to take it seriously. You
Right.
speak at Christian conferences, apologetics conferences, and you have a lot of respect for Christian apologists. And I have a great deal of respect for you as well. So,
Thank you.
so that's great. What I wanted to do real quick is just mention to whoever is watching live. I think that the comments are actually enabled now. And if anybody wants to just post a test comment, you can write testing 1, 2, 3, and just so that we can see that the comments are actually live and enabled now. Last time I did an episode, they were not enabled, and so this time supposedly they should be. And if anyone who's listening has a question, put comments in the comment section, but also put questions in there. And if you want to ask a question, put in a Q, like a capital Q and a colon, and then type your question out, or type the whole word question with a colon. And then that'll catch my eye. I try to expose the comments, whenever they're relevant, but I don't always see them. And so if you put a question in there and you use that question colon, that'll increase the chances that I'll see it and that we'll be able to get to it. Aha, the comments are working. We have a comment that says testing from Lynn. So thank you, Lynn. Thanks for being my guinea pig. I appreciate it. You're great. And so here we go. What I want to do is today, you and I, Richard, we decided that we wanted to address one of the most important topics in my book. And
This book, is this the book you're talking about?
that's the one I'm talking about. Machines
Wow.
don't laugh. Yeah.
Look at that. Wow. Wow. This is on Amazon from what I understand.
Yeah. Well, I think that's where you got it.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, that's the book. Machines Don't Laugh. I wrote the book actually started writing it in 2016. I finished it somewhere around 2017, but I didn't actually publish it until 2021. But it was pretty much finished, at least 4 years before that, for the publish date. And it turns out that one of the main topics that I want to talk about and that I cover in the book is something that a whole lot of other Christian apologists and even a lot of other atheists have discovered, have noted, and have actually pointed out. And that's what I want to talk about today. And I think you actually suggested that we talk about this because that's one of the things that was on your list,
Right.
for things that you wanted to cover. And I think, in my humble opinion, I think this is one of the most powerful death blows to atheism. But take that with a grain of salt because I'm biased. I'm biased in favor of theism and Christian theism in particular. So, but I think that it's a very powerful argument, and I think that everybody, no matter what their worldview is, should be aware of this issue and this problem. And that's the problem of scientific determinism. That's the phrase that Stephen Hawking uses, who was an atheist. And the other term that I like to use is materialistic determinism or naturalistic determinism. And the idea is that if there is no God, then what we are left with is simply natural law as the causes of everything that occurs in the universe. And the problem comes in when we realize that if natural law is the cause of everything that occurs in the universe, then that means that it is the cause of everything about mankind. And in particular, it's the cause of all of our thoughts, beliefs, and judgments in our heads. And so the big question is, if all of our thoughts, beliefs, and judgments are determined by these natural forces in nature, then we have no way of knowing whether or not any of our beliefs are reliable, because they're simply caused by the laws of physics and chemistry operating in our brain. And the laws of physics and chemistry are not going to be what we call truth seeking. And so what I want to do is I want to read a couple of quotes, and I'm going to put these on the screen real quick. The first quote is from Stephen Hawking. And it is from his book. No, it's not there. Hold on a second. It's from his book, The Grand Design. So I'm going to have to open it with another program here. There we go. Okay, it's from The Grand Design. And here's the quote. It is Laplace who is usually credited with the first clearly postulating scientific determinism. Given a state of the universe at one time, a complete set of laws fully determines both the future and the past. This would exclude the possibility of miracles or an active role for God. The scientific determinism that Laplace formulated is the modern scientist's answer to question 2. And question 2, a couple of pages earlier in his book, is there such a thing as an exception to any of these natural laws? And he points out that if there's an exception to a natural law, that would properly be called a miracle. And so he says, it is in fact the basis of all modern science. This principle of scientific determinism is what he's talking about. This principle is the basis of all modern science, and a principle that is important throughout this book. And again, the book is The Grand Design by Stephen Hawking. A scientific law is not a scientific law if it holds only when some supernatural being decides not to intervene. So I'm going to put up the next quote. From the same book, and this is the continuation of what Stephen Hawking was saying in the first quote. So give me a second, and I will.
While you're doing that, I'll mention he had a great show, Stephen Hawking. I mean, it might have been 15 years now, but it was on some kind of a science channel. Back in the old days, the science channels on TV would actually have science specials and not the stuff that they have on there now. But they took a lot of Stephen Hawking's research and made like a 10 episode, sort of like Cosmos. So I'm familiar with a lot of this, even though it's not based entirely on that one book. It is based on his research.
Okay. All right. That's the same. It's the same quote. Bear with me for just a second. I'm going to bring up the second one.
And also, as you're bringing that up, I'll also mention that, when I would ever learn something new about science over the last 30 years, and I wasn't a Christian, learning stuff about science didn't make me even more sure about atheism. I was thinking, wow, this is so amazing. This is so spectacular. All these complex things that I'm learning. I can see why theists would say that there must be some sort of a designer or fine tuner. I don't sign off on that, but I can understand why people would think that. The more you learn about science, the more miraculous you could think things are. I could see that.
Right. Okay. So the next quote I have here, It says, since people live in the universe and interact with the other objects in it, scientific determinism must hold for people as well. And that's one of the things that we just talked about right prior to your introduction, or after your introduction. Though we feel that we can choose what we do, our understanding of the molecular basis of biology shows that biological processes are governed by the laws of physics and chemistry, and therefore are as determined as the orbits of the planets. So I'm going to read that again. They are as determined as the orbits of the planets. Recent experiments in neuroscience support the view that it is our physical brain, following the known laws of science, that determines our actions and not some agency that exists outside those laws. It is hard to imagine how free will can operate if our behavior is determined by physical law. So it seems that we are no more than biological machines and that free will is just an illusion. And when I read that, when I read his phrase, biological machines, that inspired me to write my book called Machines Don't Laugh.
Right.
Because one of the central theses, one of the central principles that I write about in the book is that if there's no God, then we are nothing more than biological machines, just like Stephen Hawking said. But the problem is the machines don't do the kinds of things that human beings do. Machines don't laugh, they don't cry, they don't love, they don't hate, they don't care if their fellow machines are damaged or destroyed. They don't fall in love, they don't write symphonies, so on. And so that is the best description of scientific determinism that I have come across so far. I haven't come across a better one, but there are others out there that are equally as potent. And so I want to share another one. And this one is from an atheist scientist by the name of JBS Haldane. And let me see if I can get this up on the screen.
And I'm taking notes as you're throwing all this quotes at me. I'm taking notes so we can stay organized.
Yeah, and I can put them back up on the screen if we need to also.
Okay.
I took my logo off because it was covering up part of the words there. So, but I put it back on because I don't think that'll be necessary this time. JBS Haldane wrote the following, and keep in mind that he is an atheist. He says, if my mental processes are determined wholly by the motions of atoms in my brain, I have no reason to suppose that my beliefs are true, and hence I have no reason for supposing my brain to be composed of atoms. And again, this is an atheist who is writing this. It's not a Christian who is pointing this out. My last quote is from C.S. Lewis. And if I don't know whether we actually discussed this book or not, but Victor Reppert wrote an outstanding book that I highly recommend called C.S. Lewis's Dangerous Idea.
Okay.
And so Reppert actually quoted C.S. Lewis in that book. And I'm going to put this book or this quote up so that we can consider that one as well.
I'm real familiar with C.S. Lewis's books. I haven't heard that book that you told me about, but I am familiar with C.S. Lewis.
Yeah, I strongly recommend that book, C.S. Lewis's Dangerous Idea by by Victor Reppert.
We can put that also in the comments at the end of this video. I'll have some books and you'll have some books, and we can put all that in the description.
Excellent. Yep. Okay, so C.S. Lewis writes this. Supposing there was no intelligence behind the universe, no creative mind, in that case, nobody designed my brain for the purpose of thinking. It is merely that when the atoms inside my skull happen for physical or chemical reasons to arrange themselves in a certain way, this gives me, as a byproduct, the sensation I call thought. But if so, how can I trust my own thinking to be true? It's like upsetting a milk jug and hoping that the way it splashes itself will give you a map of London. But if I can't trust my own thinking, of course, I can't trust the arguments leading to atheism, and therefore have no reason to be an atheist or anything else. Unless I believe in God, I cannot believe in thought, so I can never use thought to disbelieve in God. And I think that is one of the most powerful ways that this problem can be expressed. And now our mutual friend Tim Stratton has an argument that he calls the free thinking argument. The free thinking argument is very closely related to this argument. There's his book, Human Freedom, Divine Knowledge, and Mere Molinism. Yeah. Now, there is a similar argument that exists in theistic determinism. Because in theistic determinism, that's the idea that God determines all of our beliefs. And in both models, in both worldviews, theistic determinism and scientific or materialistic or naturalistic determinism, something other than you, something other than me, is determining all of our thoughts and beliefs and judgments.
Right.
And if we have no free will, then we cannot formulate our own beliefs on our own. Something else is determining our beliefs for us. And Tim's free thinking argument works for any kind of determinism, and I think that this whole argument about scientific determinism works for theistic determinism as well. All determinism is determinism. If it's exhaustive determinism, then that means that it is that everything that we think is being determined by something other than ourselves, and it cannot be otherwise. That's one of the most important things that we have to realize about this. Because the term determined means that it is necessitated by antecedent conditions prior to ourselves and outside of ourselves, something other than ourselves. And theistic determinism means that God determines all of our thoughts, beliefs, and judgments, and we have no idea whether or not, we have no reason to believe that God is trustworthy when he determines all those things. We also have no way of knowing that the laws of physics and chemistry are trustworthy, that they're going to give us true beliefs. All we know is that those things are determining our beliefs, and if that's the case, then we have no idea whether our beliefs are trustworthy. So that's kind of the big problem. That's the last chapter in my book, and I consider it kind of the crescendo, the apex of the book. The whole book leads up to the last chapter, and the last chapter is what I consider humbly, as humbly as I can, but the last chapter is what I consider the death blow to atheism. What I want to do is turn it over to you, and I just want you to tell me what your thoughts are on this, and if you think that there is a way to possibly get around this problem if God does not exist. Is there a path to human knowledge without God being in the picture?
Okay. The first thing I want to cover, because we covered a lot of stuff in that quote, and also I want to say part of my ministry, as I go out and talk to people, and as we discussed in our last podcast, there's several Christian organizations that have me go out and talk to Christian audiences, and also in my work. And my work, I'll go out because I work in counterterrorism, so I'm used to speaking publicly. But one thing I get into is this argument when I go talk to Christians or other theists. Mormons especially. My wife and I and our two kids, we live in a very heavy Mormon-centric community. So I probably interact with the LDS community even more than the Trinitarian Christians. But this free will is a huge topic that comes up a lot. And there's a couple things I wanted to talk about for this first, and I've shared this with Tim. As you said before, Tim and I are friends. We talk about free will a lot because that's his jam. The thing that I share with Tim, and especially Tim, because he does something that a lot of Christians don't do. My thing with free will is to act like you have it, and if we don't, just worst case scenario, I always like to imagine aliens coming from another planet, and they can show everything. They can prove every single thing, from dust to humanity. They can show everything. They have no gaps, and they say, okay, you don't have free will. If they showed me that, I would say, okay, still act like you do. Like Jordan Peterson says, act like God does exist. I always say, act like free will does exist. So that what happens is I wake up on a Monday morning, and there's a series of things I have to do that week. And sometimes I'll visualize looking at the calendar, and I'll say, okay, by Sunday, these things have to be done. And by the end of the day, these things have to be done, whether it's my family, whether it's working out, whether it's my career. There's a list of things that have to be done. And I act as if I need to purposefully accomplish those tasks and meet these goals.
So you need to exercise your volition.
Right. And if volition is an illusion, the aliens come by and they laugh at me, and they're like, because aliens can laugh, machines can't, but aliens can. And they say, haha, you think this is volition and you think it's as purposeful. And I'm like, okay, you got me. But I'm still going to do it. And here's my big thing that I tell to a lot of Christians, because a lot of Christians don't do it. Tim Stratton does. A lot of them don't take the steps. They don't go throughout the day and make sure that they're physically fit, that their nutrition is fit, that they balance their work life, that they balance their apologetics in real life. And a lot of them get too caught up in some things and let other things lapse. And they end up kind of getting caught, as anybody would, if you don't take the time to like actively think about all these different things you need to do. And Tim Stratton is probably one of the greatest examples of somebody who does take those steps. And so whenever I kind of preach at some of the Christians who maybe are so fixated on trying to teach me that there needs to be a foundation, that they've kind of let themselves lapse, and maybe there's a lot of things about their life they need to fix, but they're so fixated on trying to find out the philosophical standards for things. I'm like, okay, have these thoughts, but don't forget throughout the day to stay very, very busy. Stay on top of the steps that you need to take. And Tim Stratton, he and I are both in our 50s, but we're in great shape, and we spend a lot of time throughout the day making sure that we take all these steps. And so Tim Stratton does do that. A lot of Christians don't, and a lot of atheists don't. But I spend a lot of time speaking to Christians and Mormons who don't take the steps. So I say, act like you have it, free will. Act like you have to get these things done. And do that throughout the day, even if it's an illusion. So I always say, I'm okay with that. If it's an illusion, I'm still going to do it. I'm still going to play the game, even though it's all a huge trick on me. And people and aliens are laughing at me because they know better. I'm still going to do it, because I guarantee you, if anybody sits still and says, okay, it's been proven to me that I don't have free will, and you just sit there, your life is going to be much different. If you just sit there and wait for the world to happen to you, your life is going to be, your experiences are going to be much different. But if you act as if you have free will and you get out there and you get stuff done, your life is going to be better. It's going to be more improved. You're going to have more meaning and more purpose in your life. So I always say, get out there, get the stuff done. Don't get caught up on too much on whether you have free will or whether you can prove it. Take the steps. I always say those are my big three words. Take the steps that you need to take throughout the week. And be brutal on yourself and hold yourself accountable, and your friends and family accountable. Have them hold you accountable. That's my big thing with free will. And so I can sit in a conversation with the greatest of metaphysical theologians and atheists on whether free will exists. And I've got 2 books behind me on free will. They just came out a few months ago from 2 atheist scientists on free will. I can sit in with them for a couple hours and hear them out, but then I'm going to go back to what I have to get done. Even if it's all an illusion, I'm going to make sure that I act as if I do have free will, and I'm not going to get caught up on if I have free will. I'm just going to act as if I do. And my life is much better that I do that. So that's my big thing with free will, because I've had a lot of Christians say, if you don't have it, stop. You're being ridiculous. You're not acting consistent with your beliefs. If you think it might be an illusion, then you're being inconsistent with your beliefs. And I'm like, well, okay. And for them, that's, they're like, no, you're being inconsistent. You've got to stop. But I just think I think they go too deeply down the philosophical road when they do that. So I always push back and say, don't get too frustrated about this. And, while you're picking on me, make sure that you catch up to me. Make sure you're doing all the things that I'm doing before you, say that I'm doing something wrong. Tim Stratton can tell me I'm doing something wrong, but a lot of Christians, I think, are so caught up on the philosophy and the metaphysics that they probably need to be more busy rather than trying to convince me that I need to consider whether I have free will. So that's my big stage that I had to get out of the way for free will.
So that's your practical response.
Right. That's my practical response. And there might not ever be knowledge-based true revelation to me that shows me whether we really have free will. I do have some thoughts about it, but I first of all want to say that no matter what I learn, even if worst case scenario I learn that I have zero free will, I'm always going to act as if I do. That's just how I'm going to live my life. It's worked really well. It works for my family, my community, my career, my podcasts, the things I like to do. It's very pragmatic, but if it's not true, I don't care. I'm going to keep doing it. In terms of whether we actually do have free will, and also covering natural forces, there's a lot of research now that there's a lot of randomness. There's two things I want to get into real quick. One is that there's a lot of randomness in the universe. And one example, I like to use this example even though it can't be proven. There's no way for us to test this, but there's some science behind it. One of the books behind me is from a guy named Sean Carroll. It's not the Sean Carroll that we all know and love in the apologetics and atheist world. There's a Sean Carroll that the atheists like, and the one that debated William Lane Craig. There's another Sean Carroll, Sean B. Carroll, who's a biologist. And he talks about how the DNA from a man and a woman, when a human man and a human woman have a baby, once their DNA is combined, there's actually 70 trillion, there's more than 70 trillion possibilities for the man's DNA and woman's DNA. So like my wife and we have two teenage daughters. We could have had, if there's a way to, if there was a way to happen, we could have had more than 70 trillion unique children. And that's not even including mutations. If our DNA, half mine and half hers, and all the different variations, we could have over 70 trillion unique children. And when the DNA is getting together and it's deciding which of those unique 70 trillion is going to actually be the person that comes up, this Sean B. Carroll says they're at the point now where they can see that like it just comes down into some places as to whether an electron is there or not. And whether the electronic there is quantum, it's random. It could be there, or it could not be there. And if you were to rewind it, it might not be there the next time. If you were to rewind, so like, our oldest kid, let's say that she was officially that DNA became her DNA at a certain point in time, and she grew up to be our oldest daughter. If you were to rewind that, it could be a different person. And it would come down to different electrons. And so Sean B. Carroll says that might just be random. And there's no way to test that, to rewind it. But now that they're at the point with the science that they can say it really is, as these DNA is combining, it really comes down to whether electrons are there or not. And that electron is quantum. So he's like, there's probably a lot of randomness there, which means that if this is true, for instance, then even if my wife and I were going to have two kids, we might not know which two kids. So if you rewind our lives and we go forward again and have two more kids, very likely it could be two more kids. So for me, that's not determinism. That's two separate people. And again, you can't prove this, but I understand the science behind it. And I'm guessing there's probably other examples too, where there's just randomness that you can't predict what's going to happen if there's randomness. So that's my first point, is there might be too much randomness for us to ever decide that the universe is completely predictable. If it is natural forces, then it is, but some of that is randomness. And then my second thing is that there's a whole branch of research now that's showing, and this will be another name I'm going to throw out here, and I'll send it to you after this to put up. The guy's name is Michael Levin, Levin, from Tufts University. He is demonstrating that our cells, and for that matter, all cells, are actually problem-solving organisms. So problem-solving means they're not determined. They're actually looking at different, they're actually taking in things that are happening and working together to get around the problem. So maybe there's parts of them that are, once there's a goal that's set up, maybe there's parts of them that determine it. But if they're actually problem solving, and I'm going to read a little bit from another book here to bolster this argument. But if there's things that life is creating to solve problems, then that for me takes away the determinism aspect. That means the universe is chaotic, and one of the things that had to evolve to get to the chaos would be problem solving. And we're not even at neurology yet. We're just talking about cells. So remember that Michael Levin, and I'll send you that name. This is another book called The Master Builder. This author here is not Michael Levin, but he's also talking about how the new science of the cell is rewriting the story of life. I just want to say, over the next 10 years, apologetics is going to have to change drastically because so much of apologetics and philosophy is based on the mind. And they say, well, this will require a mind. If this is true, the agential thinking, the actual problem solving actually happens before our minds evolved. So that cells, even before there's any neurology, they're already doing things like, he says, let's see, cells can send orders, measure links. Let's see, there's a couple of things here that he says. Exchange information, use their positions relative to each other to build tissues, sculpt organs, and produce whole organisms. So between this guy, Arias, and the master builder, Arias is his last name, and Michael Levin, I urge your listeners and viewers to look this up. If cells are solving problems, then that makes me think that determinism and natural forces might not be as solid as some atheists. And in fact, I would imagine even Stephen Hawking, who would probably be surprised by some of the research that they're discovering now. So yeah, like when I say agential, like an agent, if it's true that cells are like agents, then that's a whole other thing. It doesn't disprove theism. If I was a Christian and I started to learn this research, I would say, wow, this shows that there's a designer even before neurology evolved. There's just some sort of biological thinking and planning that has a goal and knows how to communicate the goal and knows how to work with other organisms before we even have neurological wiring. So I don't think this defeats theism, but I think it rewrites theistic apologetics. And so that's why I say over the next 10 years, we're going to stop talking about the mind and we're going to start talking about how biological organisms are making decisions and having goals and looking at several options and choosing one and then communicating what the solution is going to be before the mind is even a concept, So that's why I say I think apologetics is going to be rewritten. So I wanted to throw out those two things, the randomness and the problem solving at a minuscule scale before neurology is one reason why I'm skeptical of this scientific determinism. There's a great deal of scientific influence and a lot of natural laws and, things that we decide to do. There's a whole bunch in our experiences and our background that have a lot to do with what we do. But I don't think that even a mind outside of us can predict what's going to happen because there's so much randomness. There's some other philosophy that said if there's some computer or some sort of, I forget who the philosopher was, but he knew every single complex thing. That might not be possible. If randomness is really what it looks like it might be that we can't predict the future. And so in that case, we're just problem solving machines. So that's the first two things I wanted to get out. My thing on free will and my thing on determinism, at least at the natural level. I wanted to get those out first. And I'll pause there.
Okay. Well, nobody can say you're not thinking about this stuff.
Right.
And that's part of what I appreciate.
Awesome.
There are some unbelievers who are content to rely on whatever the atheistic scientists say,
Right.
and just leave it at that.
Yes.
And you're not doing that, and so you get, your stock goes way up.
Thank you. And in fact, I like to say, you and I have talked about this before, but I say that we're all zealots. Like I said earlier, we all have something sacred, but we're also zealots. And one thing I like to tell people is that the majority of us are zealots for leave me alone. And that includes theists too, that they're like, okay, I'm part of this group. I'm with them. Stop talking to me. And there's atheists, Christians, Muslims, Hindus who say that. And I think the majority of the people, that's what they're zealous about is I'm going with the flow. And so if you're not like that, if you're trying to look and test the boundaries, A, it might get you killed. B, it might make you unpopular. It could also be fulfilling. You might change the world, but statistically speaking, I think most people just say, my big thing is leave me alone. So anybody who's not doing that, I feel your pain.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, so if you don't mind, I could just share some thoughts about those two things.
Okay.
And the first, in the first place, you're talking about that how randomness appears to exist in the universe,
Yes.
and that if randomness, I think that you could formulate an argument. Let me formulate the argument for you, if you don't mind, and then if what I formulate is not doesn't reflect what you're saying, then you can obviously correct me. Okay.
Okay.
But I think that the argument that you would make here is, if everything is determined, there would be no randomness.
Right.
There is randomness, and therefore not everything is determined.
Yeah, that sounds right. And if it turns out that there's a problem with that, I'll consider that. But right now, what you're saying seems right to me.
Okay. Well, I think I'm interpreting it right.
Yes.
And I always want to be careful, that I don't misrepresent whatever someone is trying to share,
Hmm.
and you'd be the last person that I would want to misrepresent, uh, just because I have such fondness for you. So,
Well, thank you.
so what the first thought that comes into my head, the first determined thought that came into my head
And as you were determined. Yes. Go ahead.
was
I'm just kidding.
was that I think that I would suggest this distinction.
Mhm.
I think there is a big distinction between determinism and predictability.
Okay.
Um, and what I would say is that if anybody, you or whoever, if anybody were to be able to demonstrate that there are some things in the universe that are unpredictable, and presumably we would say unpredictable by human minds,
Right.
um, I think that wouldn't necessarily mean that the universe is not determined, that everything that occurs in the universe is not determined. So if you talk about how some random forces exert some kind of influence or even determining cause on some biological processes or whatever it might be,
Hmm.
um, it could be that those random causes were actually determined in the way that they randomly operated. Um, so I don't, I think that you could make you could make a case that um, if there is randomness, that a mind would not be able to predict it based on the empirical evidence and based on the series of cause and effect relationships that exist. Um, I think that if God exists, that he would be an exception to that, because God doesn't predict, he doesn't know things because he's able to predict them. God knows everything if he exists. God would know everything in advance simply because he's not a time-bound being. And so he knows what's going to happen in the future, even if what happened was a result of randomness. So he
Hmm.
would be an exception to that rule. And I think that I think I would probably argue that if God exists, his knowledge is not based on predictability or not based on prediction. I
Right.
think his knowledge would be based on omniscience, and omniscience is not predictability. Omniscience is, I know what these random causes are gonna cause. I know what these results are going to be. Even though they were random, I still know the outcome. I think God can say that, even if human beings wouldn't be able to say that. The only way that we could know something that hasn't happened yet would be to somehow try to predict it based on certain factors that we think that give us the ability to predict something.
Right.
Uh, and so I think I would probably stop short of the idea that if something is determined, that it must be predictable, or if something is unpredictable, it therefore isn't determined. Because even random forces are within the scope of natural law, are they not?
Random. Yeah. If natural forces, if that's what all that is, if there's no mind behind natural forces, I'm saying that it looks like randomness is part of that, and that's, whether just because of entropy or whatever.
Yeah.
I'm saying that, yeah, I think randomness is a natural outcome of natural laws.
And so I think so. Would you agree if I were to propose the idea that if randomness exists, that randomness still exists within the scope of natural law?
Right, right, yeah.
Not,
That's what I'm thinking is probably true.
it's not outside the scope of natural law.
Right, right.
Yeah.
It's all natural. That's why I think natural law can be creative. I think natural law can create things with that randomness.
Okay. Um, okay. So I would have to do a lot of thinking about this.
Okay.
And actually, I have done a lot of thinking about it because some people have proposed the idea that if randomness exists, then somehow free will could possibly exist because there's some things that are random.
Right.
And there are determinists, by the way, theistic determinists, who have actually argued that if human beings have free will, that destroys the order of the universe. And if that's the case, then randomness prevails and therefore order breaks down.
Yeah, there's even theists. Open theists will say that the future doesn't exist yet. So they're
Right.
like, it's not a limitation on God's power to not know the future.
Yeah.
It's just like a logical contradiction. You can't know what's not there yet. So God doesn't know either. And it's not, they're not knocking God's power. They're just saying if it doesn't exist, then there's nothing to know yet.
Right. So there are two kind of branches to the outcome, I think, to this line of thinking. And so let me just throw them out, and then I'll throw them on the wall, and you see if you want to tear them down.
Okay.
You're certainly welcome to do that.
Okay.
This is kind of friendly counterpoint, and I like the fact that I can throw these ideas out and that you're not offended, that you don't think I'm, that I'm trying to attack you or anything like that. We're grappling with the truth together, and that's one of the things that friends do. So I appreciate that.
Sure. Sure.
Here's one of the things that I have thought about over the years. And it's a conclusion that I would argue for, but I'm arguing for it kind of out of a vacuum at the moment. And what I'm arguing is that there is no rational basis for us to believe this thesis, and the thesis is this: free will and randomness are equivalent. In other words, if I have free will, does that mean that the choice that I makes that I makes
Mhm.
does that mean that the choice that I make was a random choice? Or does that mean that the choice I made was a creative choice? Now, as a theist, I hold that human beings are made in the image of God, and that one of the attributes that human beings possess, that reflects an attribute of God is the ability to make creative choices in their free will. And what I normally do in my whole thought process about this, which I'm sure is absolutely determined by natural law, in my thought process about this, what I do is I separate a creative choice from a random choice. So when I go to the restaurant and I order a ribeye instead of a prime rib, some people would say that if that's a free will decision, then it was random because nothing caused that choice. No pre-existing conditions caused that choice. And my response is, I don't think that's a random choice. I think that's a creative choice. That there was something in my mind that somehow brought me to the point where I wanted ribeye instead of a prime rib. And I've never heard a case that anybody has ever made that would lead to the conclusion that my choice of ribeye versus prime rib was random. I don't think random is a proper category to apply to that choice. I think the way that we describe that choice is that it's a creative choice. And the reason that we are making creative choices is because we're made in God's image, and God also makes creative choices. And so he has taken that attribute and he has baked it into mankind. And so that's kind of the first idea, that I have about this. The second idea about this is that I don't think that we can actually say that natural law is going to cause a random effect. And you may push back on that, and that's perfectly fine. But if someone wants to tell me that natural law is going to create a random effect, is going to cause a random effect, I would ask that they back that thesis up with an argument. In other words, I want you to argue for the fact or for the thesis that that natural law can cause an effect that's actually random. It seems to me that those things are mutually exclusive, that those things are contradictory. Because if natural law causes something, then it's not a random cause and it's not a random effect. Because natural law has causes, and according to the atheist scientists like Stephen Hawking, those natural laws, what they cause is a determining cause. That's why they came up with the whole concept of scientific determinism. And then the other idea that I have kind of bounced around in my head about this is that if indeed randomness, if you can demonstrate that randomness exists, and if that leads you to the conclusion that not everything is determined, then isn't that an argument against determinism? And I would say that's an argument against determinism. And if there is no God, determinism is true. If determinism is not true because some things are random, then that would lead me to the conclusion that there is a God, not that there isn't. So that's kind of where my thought processes go. Now, I could be making a mistake here. And if I'm making a mistake in logic, then I would be happy. I would enjoy anyone who wants to point that out. I watched a video where an economist by the name of Milton Friedman was giving a speech, and there was a question answer time afterwards, after his speech, and somebody got up and he said to Milton Friedman, he asked Milton Friedman a question. He said, if your economic theories are correct, wouldn't it lead to this conclusion, and wouldn't this have to be true in order for your theory to be correct? And Milton Friedman said, no, that's not a valid conclusion, from my economic theory. And then he explained why. And the guy said, I I'm trying to remember the way that he put it. He said, I concede my point with joy. And so if someone can tell me that my thought process is erroneous here, then I will concede my point with joy. I'll be happy to concede that. When Tim Stratton and I did our episode on whether Calvinism is a different gospel, one of the first things out of both of our mouths was, we could be wrong about this. And I would say the same thing about this. But so far, my position on this is, and I think that there's reasons. I think this is a reasonable position, that if randomness means determinism is false, then that's actually evidence for God. It's not evidence against God. Because if God doesn't exist, everything would be determined and there wouldn't be any randomness. That's kind of the train of thought that I have going. But you also mentioned the fact that cells work together and they cooperate and they actually accomplish certain specific goals. And that tends to bruise the whole determinism ideology.
Right. And a quick example of this would be, and this Michael Levin, that we'll put the name on the description. A quick example of that is that they figured out that cells are talking to each other in like this bioelectric signals. So it's like the energy from the cells, they've sent signals to each other and they co-opt each other. And like, so one cell will say, I know you were getting ready to go do this, but now come over here, you're going to help us do this. And they use this bioelectric signals, and Levin's team has figured out what the signal was for a frog leg. And so they put the signal for build a frog leg here. So they had, severed a frog leg, and they had figured out what the cells told each other for, some animals can regenerate. And they found out what the signal was for build a leg here. They took that signal and they put it on another species that didn't regenerate, and they said, put a frog leg here. And the cells built something very similar to a frog leg. So they figured out the actual cell language for building a frog leg, but then they would play games with it, and they would obstruct it. So once they on one frog or one species was starting to build a leg, they saw what all the cells did, because you can do that with your microscopic cameras now. So then they put something in there to inhibit that. The cells realized something was wrong, and they went around it. And because there was like, we're going to build a frog. We've received the bioelectric signal for a frog leg. We're building a frog leg, and you can do whatever you want. We're going to find a way around it. So that's why he's saying that, this is a goal. There's no neurology, there's no brain there. And if there is, it's God's, but there's no neurology within the cells. Just that signal means build a frog leg to them for whatever reason. And by the way, they don't know. They don't know why it happens, but they do know that it does happen. And they say, okay, so these cells are acting as if they have a goal, because they're able to reach that goal from various different methods as we're obstructing them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I find that fascinating.
Yeah, me too. And it doesn't harm theism. If I was a Christian, I would be like, woo, I'm going to use this.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think that it supports theism instead of harming theism.
Right.
Because one of the things that I've argued for in the book, Machines Don't Laugh, is that if there is no God, there's no intelligence behind the formation of biological life in history. And if that's the case, then there are certain behaviors and certain attributes that biological life has that it would not have. And one of them is a biological imperative. And there are two main biological imperatives that exist in life: the survival and reproduction. Did somebody turn the lights off? I think I lost you, Richard. Are you still there? Paging the Fathiest Atheist. Okay, maybe there's some technical difficulties. Okay, he just left the building. He's trying to come back. So bear with us, folks. I think there's some technical difficulties that Richard is having. Aha.
I got a phone call while you were saying about biological imperatives.
Oh, okay.
And I hung up on the phone call and it wouldn't put me back in. So I had to leave and come back.
Okay.
I actually don't know how to shut that off. I'm afraid that if I put it on airport mode, then that might keep me from being able to dial into this. So I don't know how to keep.
I don't know.
All right. If it happens again, I'll just, you'll have to just see me leave the studio and come back.
Okay. No problem.
But I did hear what you were saying about biological imperative when that phone call hit.
Okay. Did you hear when I talked about what the two primary biological imperatives are?
No, tell me again.
The two biological imperatives that I normally deal with, there may be others, but the two primary ones that I like to deal with are survival and reproduction.
Right. I agree with that.
Okay. And what I argue for in the book, and I'm sure you remember this because you read the book, and I appreciate the fact that you did that.
This book?
That's the one. It's what a coincidence that you just happen to have that book right in front of you.
Right.
Of all the books you own, I can see hundreds of books behind you, and of all the books you own, you just happen to have that one on your desk. That's an amazing coincidence.
It was random.
It was exactly random. Well, that proves a lot. I discuss the biological imperatives in the book, and the argument that I'm making is that if God does not exist and biological life forms were produced by non-intelligence, that there's no intelligence behind the formation of biological life in Earth history. Mm-hmm. If that's the case, there would be nothing there to build biological imperatives, which are a form of intelligence, into biological life forms. And Richard Dawkins is very fond of talking about cooperation. Mm-hmm. He says there are a whole bunch of blobs of protoplasm that cooperate with each other,
right,
in order to accomplish a specific goal or objective.
Yep.
And I'm sitting here face palming when I read that.
Because you're like, how did that happen?
I have to admit that I do have an emotional reaction to these things. I am not a non-emotional person, but I face palm when I read that, because I think, why would non-intelligence produce a biological imperative in biological life forms? It has no reason to. In other words, why does biological life want to survive? If non-intelligent and impersonal forces of nature built the building blocks of a cell and eventually built it into a cell, and the cell eventually became multicellular life forms, and the process continued to more advanced life forms. If that's the case, why would those life forms want to survive? Mm-hmm. And so the question could be extended to the area of what you're talking about. Why would a bunch of cells want to cooperate with each other in order to accomplish an objective? They have no reason to have any objectives. They have no reason to accomplish anything. They have no reason to send signals from one cell to another, if indeed that signal path exists. What would build that kind of imperative, that kind of desire to survive or cooperate or achieve something into unintelligent biological, impersonal biological life, biological components. Um, and I've never been given a satisfactory answer to that question.
Mhm.
And I give the analogy in the book of my favorite vehicle is the Dodge Durango. I own right now. I own the sixth Dodge Durango that I've owned in my lifetime. I just love Dodge Durangos, and anybody that knows me knows that if my Dodge Durango gets into an accident and gets blown up and pulverized, that the next vehicle I'm going to buy is going to be a Dodge Durango. I just like them. I love them. And I gave an example, an analogy in the book that says that my Durango has the ability to transport me from my home to the grocery store. It has an engine, it has a steering mechanism, it's got fuel in it. So it has everything it takes to take me from my home to the grocery store. So it has an ability. So we'll just call that an ability. My Durango has the ability to transport me from one place to another.
Mhm.
And the point that I make in the book is that ability by itself will never produce actuality. In other words, the fact that my Durango has the ability to transport me to the grocery store does not mean that it's going to do that all by itself. Because my Durango is sitting in the garage right now, and it has no reason to take me to the grocery store. The reason that my Durango takes me to the grocery store is because an intelligent personal being is getting into it, starting it up, and is operating it and making it take me to the grocery store. And so my argument is ability by itself does not produce necessity, and it does not produce actuality. And what we're talking about with biological imperatives is that survival is a necessity. If biological life forms don't survive, they'll die. And the point that I've always made is, okay, then they'll die because they have no reason to survive. There's nothing in there that's going to put that biological imperative and install that biological imperative into that biological life form or that group of life forms like cells. There's nothing there that's going to put that imperative to survive in there. Now, a biological imperative is very easy to explain on theism, right? Because if God exists and if he is responsible for creating biological life, then it's no mystery that he would install that biological imperative to survive and to reproduce into that biological life. It's perfectly easy to explain on theism. But I don't see where atheism can get the existence of those biological imperatives, and I don't know how atheism can explain the fact that cells cooperate with each other and so on. But the more fundamental question is that if determinism is true, and if everything that we conceive of in our brains is the product of physics and chemistry, or even randomness, even if random forces are determining what's going on in our brains, we still can't rely on our thoughts and beliefs to be true or false. If that's the case, then how do we even know that cells are cooperating with each other? How do we even know that cells have this electromagnetic communication mechanism between each other? Because what we're doing is we're concluding that those cells have that capability through scientific observation, but we're concluding that based on a kind of mechanism of scientific observation that we can't trust. So if scientific determinism is determining everything that we believe in our heads, it's also determining us to believe that we're actually observing cells and that we think those cells are cooperating with each other. But if everything is being determined by an untrustworthy antecedent condition, we have no idea whether those cells are it just we might just be, we might just be, what's the word? It might be an illusion.
Right. This could, that's another thing that I'm going to get into. We might not have time now. I'm looking at the time. But, I think a lot of our thinking is illusory. And I'll get into books on that too. I did want to bring up a couple of things you're talking about, why cells would cooperate in the first place. And this research that I'm talking about how cells are talking to each other, this has been going on for 10 years, but the problem was that the scientists that are working on it were speaking science mumbo jumbo, and it wasn't making it into the mainstream. So like in the last 5 years, some authors have popular science authors have made it more popular to talk about how cells are acting as agents. And a lot of the reasons the atheists don't like it is because they're talking about these cells as agents, so now they're talking. And another interesting thing here is that it's not coming. They do know it's not coming from DNA. So the cells are talking to each other. It's not coming from DNA, because what they're discovering is that they'll take a species and they'll change it. They'll add something to it, but because they've added a bioelectric signal to the cells have created something else. That species will have an offspring or split, because some of the things they operate on just split and rebuild, like a flatworm. And when those species split, they build the new thing that wasn't, and the DNA is still the same. So the scientists are like, this is coming from something other than DNA, which make the atheists mad, because the atheists are like, no, everything is in DNA. Cells aren't thinking. Cells are just receiving instructions from the DNA. And this research is saying, no, that's not the case. They're actually doing something outside of the DNA, and we don't know where. So the atheists don't like that, but the theists don't like it because cancer does it and viruses do it, and there's no planning in cancer. Cancer doesn't have a plan. Cancer is like, I'm going to keep growing and keep growing inside this external environment, and the cancer doesn't realize that once it wins, the host dies, and then it's going to die. So it's actually working to its own demise, but it has no idea. It feverishly does all these miraculous, inspiring things that are so complex and unreal that
Miraculous?
we're like, wow, how can cancer, but it becomes a life form of its own inside the host, destroys the host, and then it dies. So now theists don't like it either. So right now, apologetics and atheists are going to have to rebuild with this new information that neither side right now is especially pleased with. But I wanted to say that about one thing you mentioned before about how to whether you could ever prove that God doesn't exist, whether it's random or determined. One thing I want to point out is that we'll never be able to disprove that God exists. And I talked before about like aliens coming and showing us every single thing. Like aliens can say, we come from another dimension, so we can show you exactly how your universe created natural forces. We can show you how life formed with just natural forces, consciousness, appreciation for beauty, language, communication. We'll show you how all that happened with just natural forces, with no outside intervention. And we'll show you every step, every gap that you have, we'll show it to you. Even if they did that, some apologist is going to be like, you know what? The fact that these natural forces could do that is still so amazing to me that there has to be something behind it. So there's nothing aliens can show us with perfect intelligence, even if natural forces do all these things. And like you said, that natural forces can't get cells to ever talk to each other. If it turns out that that's just based on ignorance, there's just something about natural forces that we don't know yet, and the aliens show us, and we're like, oh my gosh, you're right. Natural forces can get cells to talk to each other. Even if that happens, some other apologist is going to be like, the fact that we live in that type of reality makes me think that God exists. So God's never going to go away. So I never get too worked up when like Stephen Meyer says something like, you're never going to show me how these things happen naturally. My pushback to that is, even if that does happen, even if 100 years from now, scientists do show that, there's going to be another apologist who says that's fine tuning, right now, Stephen Meyer is saying it's a gap that can't be explained by naturalism. So therefore it has to be an intelligent mind. In 100 years, once they explain it, the apologist then is going to say, It's not a gap. It's perfectly explainable. And the fact that that can be explained and the fact that that can happen is proof of fine tuning. So in 100 years, it's God by fine tuning, which is a better argument anyway. So I never get too worked up when someone says, you'll never be able to show me this. I'm like, maybe not, but even if I can, it's not going to harm theism. So I always like to throw that out in the beginning. As amazing as reality is, even if we can explain everything, you can still say that the fact is reality is like that, that you can still say that God is possible from that.
Okay, so what, real quickly,
Yeah.
I know you have more to say, but I just wanted to, before I forget it, because I always forget these things. Um, what do you think of the analogy that I brought up about my beloved Durango?
Yeah. So what I think might end up
I-
happening is that
Before you
they
say
might
that,
show. Go ahead.
let me just say real quick, where I'm going with this is that my argument is not their natural forces can't do this.
Right. I understand. You talked about your Dodge Durango. I understand what you were saying, how it required the personal.
My argument is natural forces have no reason to do this. That's where my argument is.
Right. And I don't know that reasons are a thing with natural forces. I've always said, like you were mentioning before, if it's all about survivability, then at some point things started doing things that outcompeted other things. And whether it was just because of chemicals or some other natural forces, those things got to make decisions. Those things got to be the ones who decided what to do next.
Mm-hmm.
And they outcompeted the other things that couldn't do it. And so was it for reasons? No, but it just happened. And then suddenly reality was a new picture. So it's like, there were certain bacteria that couldn't do certain things. And then new bacteria evolved that could do certain things. And suddenly the world was filled with that new bacteria. And it wasn't for reasons. It was just because the other bacteria became superior. So I don't always agree that reasons are a thing. I think it's things happen or don't, and then the ones that win get to keep trying.
But here's what's happening.
Yeah.
What's happening is that that cells or whatever it happens to be, they suddenly acquire this new way of accomplishing something.
Mm-hmm.
And now what you said is now they are making the decisions.
Right. They're acting as if they're agents for, if they're not, they're at least acting as if they are making.
And so my, my immediate thought about that is that if they're making decisions, that implies intelligence. And Richard Dawkins and his whole host of atheists, they all say with one voice, with a unified voice, that what you begin with is no intelligence. And so if something is suddenly making decisions,
right. Why did decision making evolve?
Right.
We've been talking about that.
Intelligence suddenly exists.
Right.
Whereas there was no intelligence before. And so what they're saying is that intelligence is creating itself out of nothing for no reason.
And again, it might not be reasons. It could be that intelligence does emerge through natural forces over time in certain circumstances, not because of reasons, but just because problem solving became something that evolved.
So are you saying then that intelligence appeared without a cause?
Or if it did cause, that's the thing that I'm speculating, is that if it was caused and we just don't know how it was caused. So like, we might know right now, and the thing about the four horsemen, Richard Dawkins and Dan Dennett, is they're antiquated. I'm not saying that they're dumb, but they're coming from different decades of research, and in these last 10 years is why I say apologetics and atheism are going to have to rebuild with this new information. This is new stuff, and this is going to have to bring in new theists are going to have to grapple with, how do I make cancer making these miraculous decisions only to die later? It's not evil. It's still making decisions, but to no end. It ends up killing itself. How do it doesn't really make sense in a good versus evil. It just makes sense in a hit and miss, a blind hit and miss. whatever works is what works. And then when it does work, it dies. So theists are going to have to grapple with that. And then atheists are going to have to grapple with, we said that cells are just waiting for DNA to tell them what to do. And now cells are making decisions outside of DNA. So how are we going to grapple with that? I think science is just going to keep learning new things. And the assumptions that both atheists and theist scientists had are going to get demolished. And both sides are going to have to rebuild with new information. Real quick, the thing about what I said before about how sometimes the theists will say there's no way this can happen, so God has to be the one that did it. One real example of that, if you go to a YouTube channel called Stated Clearly, he interviews Richard Dawkins. And Richard Dawkins, I don't have it here, but Richard Dawkins cites the Christian authors. They're Christian scientists who said that DNA will never be shown to be acting like computer code because God is way more glorious than computer code. So they're like, it's not going to happen. Don't look for that. It's the dumbest thing you'll ever imagine because God's greater than that. So Dawkins took that to task, and he, did all this research from what the scientists knew, which was that DNA does act like code. And then so Dawkins published his work, and he was like, it does. And then this is Dawkins talking. He was like, and then I sat back and waited to get all the points for winning that argument. But what immediately happened was other scientists like Stephen Meyer were like, wait a minute, you're saying DNA acts like code, but well, code requires a human person, so that's intelligent design. So Dawkins was like, I defeated the gap argument only to encounter the fine tuning argument. So people, if they want to go to Stated Clearly and see an example, I think that's going to keep happening. I think everything that scientists and philosophers say, there's no way you're going to show me that this happens. We're probably going to learn that it does happen. And then another theist is going to say, well, the fact that that could happen is probably an example that there's a fine tuner with a long-term plan. And so that's why I don't get too worked up when someone says, like, there's no way for my Dodge Durango, there's no way for biology to get a Dodge Durango to want to go to the store. It might turn out that there is. It might turn out that biologically there is a way that something like a Dodge Durango with the ability to get to the store would have, whether it's just chemicals or accident or whatever, does want to get to the store, but that won't disprove God. It'll just say that God had a long-term plan for something like a Durango to get to something like a store. So that's my speculation. That's how I think about your Dodge Durango argument, is that it might just be based on us not knowing stuff about naturalism yet. Also, free will books, just because we're at an hour and a half, I want to make sure I talk about for free will, and we did talk about it at the last podcast, but for people who are new to the podcast, Robert Sapolsky did a book called Determined, and Kevin Mitchell did a book called Free Agent. So Determined and Free Agents by Robert Sapolsky, Kevin Mitchell.
Right. And those are the same ones that you gave me before, right?
Right. And I just want to make sure people read those books, because these are atheist scientists. Neither one of them believe in God or anything like God. They think everything's natural forces, but they're absolutely at odds about whether free will exists. And they're scientists, and they're looking at the same research. It's just that Robert Sapolsky is looking at all the almost infinite things that are pressuring organisms to do things. And Kevin Mitchell is looking at how throughout history of biology, how biology has evolved a sense of problem solving, and taking all the different things that are coming into it and choosing the best choice. So it's interesting that without even thinking about God, you still have all the science that would lead some scientists to say we do have free will and some scientists to say we don't. So I want to make sure all the readers know that that's not even a religious versus atheist debate. That's two atheists debating that. And both of those atheists have debated each other in the past 6 months. So you can even see them debate and have that discussion.
Who's the first one that you mentioned?
Robert Sapolsky.
Is he the one? He was the one with the crazy hair and the
right.
big wiry
Yes.
beard? Okay.
Yes. Yeah. And
So,
his book is Determined.
And one of the things that he said was that if there's such a thing as randomness, he said randomness is not significant enough to overthrow determinism.
Right. He does say that.
Yeah. And especially people have pointed out quantum indeterminacy with him.
Yeah.
And his reply was the quantum indeterminacy is happening way down at the level of subatomic particles.
Yes.
And that quantum indeterminacy, if you want to call it randomness, you can call it whatever you want to. He said it's never going to bubble up to the point where it can overthrow determinism and can suddenly give us free will. He thought that idea was rather incoherent. That's the kindest word that I can give.
Right. And he still thinks that. He had the debate with that other scientist, and that other scientist got him to concede that maybe there is some of that going on, but it's not enough to overcome. So like Sapolsky is like, I'm not gonna add an amendment to my book and say that I was wrong. I don't think that you're making enough of a point to overcome what I'm saying.
Well, the argument that I'm waiting for, and I'm waiting for it with bated breath,
Yes.
is the argument that says that if randomness occurs, that can add up to, and that can actually give us free will. Because I'm still, and I could be stuck on this, and I might just be, maybe I'm just stubborn.
Yeah.
But I'm still stuck in this little orbit of saying that randomness and free will are not the same thing, that a random choice and a free creative choice from a creative mind aren't the same thing. And I what I want to know is, I want to hear an argument that demonstrates that randomness and a free will decision on the part of a human being, part of a thinking being, are the same thing.
Right. And I don't know if it'll ever work like that. And for me, I always skip all over this. Like I was saying in the beginning, I'm like, I'm going to act like I do. And if it's all an illusion, I'm okay with it. And I'll just act like I do have it.
Well, let me ask you this. What are your thoughts on the argument that I make in the book, that machines don't have illusions?
Well,
So,
this is why I think that's something about naturalism that we might find out isn't true. And this is going to be one of my, I was going to be closing, but I want to make sure I talk about it now. I think a lot of our thinking is illusion, to include this idea that we're a self. And I'm going to throw a couple of authors out real quick. Here's one author, The Self Illusion, Bruce Hood. And again, we'll put these in the comments. And then this guy, Anil Seth, Being You. Both of these guys, and if you look, especially Anil Seth, because he's the more current scientist, if you look up Anil Seth and YouTube, he'll show you all kinds of things. He'll start with an optical illusion, and he'll say an optical illusion is an illusion, and he'll can show you how you can make measurements. After you see the illusion, he'll show you measurements to show that it's an illusion, and then he'll take away the measurements, and you'll still see it. And he'll say your brain can't help looking at this illusion and telling you that it's this thing that you now know isn't true. And he says that actually applies to probably almost everything, everything that we're visualizing and thinking and perceiving as we're going through life. So Anil Seth, I think a lot of these are illusions. So how did naturalism get us to illusions? I don't know. It's a mystery to me. But this for me, it boils down to my Descartes moment. Like Descartes said, I think therefore I am, and Jordan Peterson's Descartes moment is everyone everyone recoils when they think about the Holocaust. So that must mean that there's something that would make us all recoil when they think about the Holocaust. My Descartes moment is that if you're standing on train tracks and a train is coming, move. Even if it's an illusion, even if this is all a game, even if we're a computer simulation, even if God created us, whatever the real story is, whatever reality is, everything that I'm thinking is wrong, you can't trust it. You're like a philosopher could jump out and say, you can't trust that a train is coming. I'm still going to move. And this goes back to my free will thing. I'm going to take the steps that has led to me having a good life. And, when I say a good life, that doesn't mean just doing whatever I want. A lot of my decisions are, helping with my family or helping my career, or helping my community, or doing like what we're doing now, having conversations about worldviews without, calling out for attacking each other. these are all steps that I take. And so my Descartes moment is, even if I'm fooling myself, I'm going to keep doing it. And even if aliens can prove that it's all fake, I'm still going to keep doing it. I'm okay with living with the illusion, even with these pragmatic goals. So yeah, that's how I kind of look at that. Is that if it does turn out that naturalism is leading to us having illusions, and a lot of our lives are an illusion, so be it. My worldview won't evaporate. I might grapple with it sometimes, but it doesn't. It doesn't take away my sense of meaning. It doesn't take away my sense of purpose. I'll still want to take care of my kids. My kids are going to need dinner here in Arizona pretty soon. I'm going to make sure they have dinner, even if it's all an illusion. It's just as fulfilling to me, whether it's real or not.
I would put a call out to all atheists, and that call would be, and this may sound a little harsh, but that call would be, please don't live on the basis of your worldview.
Right. Yeah. Be inconsistent.
Be
David,
inconsistent. Please don't treat your
yes.
children as though God doesn't exist.
Right.
Please don't do that.
Right.
Please don't live consistently with atheism. that's kind of
David Wood. David Wood. I don't think I've seen. I've taken a class where David Wood's wife was a part of the class, but I haven't met David Wood. But I'm going to in September. He's always said it makes me sick, or I think he says I find it intellectually repugnant. I want to make sure I say his words correctly. He says, I find it intellectually repugnant that you guys live inconsistent with your worldview. Fine, I'll take that. I'll take that insult. I'm sorry to intellectually insult you like that, but yeah, I'm going to live as if I have free will, and as if these things matter. And if we're right, if it turns out that the illusion is that we need a God for these things, then you guys are the ones who are making that up. But whoever, whatever. My thing is, if Christians made up God, or if we're making up naturalism, let's all take care of our kids and live, in respectful communities, and watch out for each other.
I absolutely agree. That if people have a worldview that leads to such bitter and negative consequences, don't follow it.
Yep.
But I would also put out the same an equal encouragement, and that is, keep studying and keep pursuing it, keep thinking about it, and don't stop with your current set of presuppositions. And I would say this for the Christian, I would say this for anybody with any worldview. Don't rest on your laurels and just be complacent. Don't think that you have figured it all out. Continue to study, continue to think about these things, to continue to pursue them, continue to consider what other thinkers are saying, and be willing to sit down and say, yeah, I could have made a mistake here. And again, that's what Tim Stratton and I are doing, about this idea of the Calvinism being a different gospel. We still want to continue to think about these things, and we still want to listen to anyone that might give us a pushback on it. But one of the things that I kind of thought of when you were talking is that I think that the idea that some natural law could be discovered in the future that might explain the things that we can't explain or haven't explained, and that we think that we need God to explain, and that might include the fact that we may be deceived. There might be some kind of illusion that we're all under. If that's the case, I don't think that's anything new. I think Christian apologists have addressed that issue long ago. I don't think that's a new issue that's going to somehow reshape the landscape of Christian apologetics, because Descartes pointed this out a long time ago, hundreds of years ago. He said, if I'm being deceived, and that's basically what an illusion is.
Right.
An illusion is deceiving you into thinking that something is true when it's actually not true. And he said, if I'm being deceived, there has to be an I to be deceived.
Right. Something
There
is
has,
still doing something.
there
There's still
has to be
something.
a there has to be a self there
Mhm.
that is being deceived, because if there is no self, there is no deception. If there's no self, there's no such thing as an illusion, because an
Well,
illusion means that I am being deceived into thinking that that I don't exist, or that something, some demon, some fiendish demon out there is determining that is deceiving me into believing something else. There has to be a me there, or there's nothing to deceive. There's nothing to have an
well,
illusion.
and even then, even if this guy is right, and if the self is an illusion, there's still a perception of self. So there's still a perception, even if that's wrong, that is perceiving something. So you're still, you can still trust that. So like if aliens were to say there's not really you, it's a bunch of cells and a bunch of systems tricking you into thinking that, I'm like, I'm okay with that. It
Yeah,
doesn't, I'm not
tricking
going to miss a step.
you.
Right.
The aliens are saying there isn't really a you. There's
Yeah.
something tricking you into
Right.
believing that there's a you. You
Well,
see how
and it,
self-referential that is?
right. But even if we're all deceiving ourselves, then the aliens are like, okay, we're going to talk so that you can understand us. But, we're giggling at you because there's not really a you, but we're going to say the word you to make you feel better. Again, I'm happy with that. I don't
To
feel
make you feel
right.
better.
Yeah. Like for me, the aliens aren't condescending me when they say that. When they say, we're only saying this to make you happy, I'm
But
like,
but you,
okay with that. I'm
you
okay
see
with that.
do you see what I'm pointing out here? Do you see what I'm trying to
Yeah.
get at here?
Right. And I'm just saying
If
that even
if an alien says, I'm trying to just make you feel better.
right. And I'm saying that even if they acknowledge that and say it's not true what we're saying, but we're saying it to make you feel better, I'm saying okay, I'm okay with that. It doesn't bother me. It doesn't set me back. I'm still going to march forward under my blissful illusion.
Okay.
I,
So
I've only
in
got
other words, something that doesn't exist is marching forward, and
right, right. If it's all a game, I'm okay with that. It doesn't. I don't miss a step in that situation. So I kind of assume that there's a authority that I trust that proves it to me. And I keep marching forward. I don't sit still and say, "Oh my gosh, well, what's the point?" And what I've seen is sometimes I'll see intellectuals say, "If I was ever shown that, then I would give up." And I'm always saying, "Don't be like that. Keep going, even if it's not true. Keep going."
well, there's another option.
What's that?
The other option is change your worldview.
Well,
Because if someone demonstrates to you that there is an incoherent, there's a problem, an insurmountable problem in your worldview, you
mhm,
can say, okay, I'm going to accept that, but I'm going to keep going and I'm going to keep living my life. But the
right.
other option is, maybe I should change my worldview, because that incoherence is telling me that there is a serious, insurmountable problem with my worldview, and therefore my worldview is false and untenable, and so I should change it. Is that kind of
Well,
another?
well, what I'm saying here is that if these aliens are right, that we're all pretending that we're selves, and we're all, we all imagine that we're selves and we're not actually selves, then it doesn't matter if you're religious or not. Your religion would be another part of your illusion, or your non-religion will be a part of your illusion. Just the very view of you being a self, if that turns out to actually not be true, and we're all fooling ourselves, then I can be a Christian or a Muslim or a Hindu or a vegetarian or a Green Bay Packers fan. Nothing changes. I'm still an illusion. I'm still an illusion. And I'm saying, even if they prove that to me, even if they say we're going to show you that that's how it is, I'm still going to keep marching. It doesn't set me back. It doesn't throw me off. And it wouldn't matter if I became a Christian or not. It would still be an illusion of a self picking a religion. One
Yeah.
of the current existing religions. I do want to point out, when you're talking about how Christians were saying, and I mentioned David Wood saying, "You guys please be consistent." When I go to atheist groups and talk to atheists, they say the same exact thing about you guys, because they pick and choose the verses that say, "Lean not on your own understanding," or the quote from Martin Luther that says, "Reason is a whore, the enemy of faith." I realize there's context to those verses, and that's not really, Christians don't get up in the morning and say, "Okay, I'm not going to lean on my own understanding." But because verses exist and because those Christian intellectuals have said that, atheists grab those and they say, okay, well, Christians need to stop leaning on their own understanding and they need to stop using reason because, reason is the enemy of faith. They do that too. Atheists do that about Christians, and they're using content from Christians. And then you guys will say the context to it. But I want to say I tell the atheists the same thing that I tell the Christians, which is keep living as if you do have free will. Keep reasoning. Whether it's a enemy of faith or whatever. I happen to know Martin Luther. I happen to know. I didn't meet him. I can make a very strong inference that what Martin Luther was talking about was motivated reasoning, which is when your deepest thoughts are like, I'm going to do this, and then you start reasoning your way to it, but you're going to do it no matter what. That's what Martin Luther was talking about. So, I don't think that Martin Luther was saying stop thinking, because after he made that quote, he went on to reason to write new stuff.
Well, and Martin Luther actually said, reason compels us to conclude that free will doesn't exist.
Right.
Which I find, I hope this isn't an inappropriate word, but I find that hilarious.
Yeah.
Because if free will doesn't exist, then he cannot reason. And so how can reason compel him to believe that free will doesn't exist? That it's self-defeating, to actually conclude that. And so, yeah, I think it's just a matter of common sense that when the Bible says don't lean on your own understanding, he's talking about recognize that your knowledge, the scope of your knowledge is limited. I don't think that's a reference to reason itself. I think it's a reference to leaning on your own ideology and leaning on your own limited scope of knowledge, and realize that God has a greater scope of knowledge. In fact, his knowledge is unlimited, and that his knowledge should transcend our knowledge. But we both operate on the same rules of reason, because if God exists, I always want to give you that prefix. If God exists, then his mind would be, in nature, would be the ground of reason. And if that's the case, then what I said in my book, Calvin's Desperation, is that if God exists and he is the author of reason, that reason is based and grounded in his nature, then anything that is irrational is automatically at war with his divine logos. Because logic comes from the word logos, and that's the Greek concept of the logos, which translates into speech, translates into rationality and thinking and logic and the whole 9 yards. So I think those atheists are a little misguided when they tell Christians that the Bible tells them not to reason, because the Bible clearly says, "Come, let us reason together."
They're picking and choosing. The atheists who do that are picking and choosing. They're stacking up content and they're using that, and then they'll sit around and say, "I don't know why Christians bother. They're not supposed to be doing it." Yeah. So I tell the atheists the same thing. Whenever a Christian says, "Well, if it's all an illusion, then stop," I'll tell him the same thing. Where the atheists say, "Well, if you can't trust your own understanding, then stop." I'll say, "No, keep going. Even if Scripture really just says don't think, keep thinking." It doesn't, but even if, just keep thinking. Keep.
Well, I would challenge you, and I would encourage you to, instead of saying if your worldview says that everything that you think is an illusion, and if your worldview destroys your ability to reason or your ability to have any kind of knowledge, I would instead of saying don't follow that and think and live as though you have knowledge anyway, I would say if your worldview tells you that you can't have knowledge, change your worldview.
Well, in this case, if what I'm thinking is true, then my religion won't make a difference. It won't change anything. All I'd be doing is switching over to another religion. So, and again, that goes back to if I'm standing on train tracks, I'm moving, even if it's all a trick, even if there's no me, I'm still going to, the perception of me is still going to move. So becoming a Christian won't change that.
And so the question that I have is, the question of the hour is, what's having that illusion if there is no you?
Well, again, you'd have to get into some of these books. What they're saying right now is they can't explain exactly how all this is happening, but they can show that a lot of what we're thinking is a lot like optical illusions. And this guy, Anil Seth, especially, can say a bunch of our uh, thoughts and our perceptions are based on illusions. He can't show exactly how that's happening, but he can show, just like with the optical illusion, he can show you the measurements that's leading these neurologists to say, okay, this is not, there is a reality. They're not denying reality. They're just saying that our brain, which is stuck inside of a skull, is doing the best it can. And a lot of what we're seeing is our brain's predictions of what it thinks ought to be happening. And they can just show that that's happening. They
Okay.
can't say exactly what it is. They can't reduce it down to, say, oh, here's the culprit. They can't do that yet, but they're saying we have a lot of reasons to be humble about what our brains are telling us.
But what I want to know is, are they attempting to answer the question that if there is no self,
Mhm.
then what is it that's having the illusion? Because if self can't have the illusion, then something else has to have that illusion. And so my question is, are they offering a suggestion? Are they offering a proposal as to what it is that's having that illusion, if it's not the self that's having it?
Right now, I don't know. I don't know what the answer is to that, and I don't know that that's their goal right now. I think right now their goal is to say, look at all these things that our brain is telling us. Look at these measurements that shows that it's not that. And for that reason, we should, be humble about what we're perceiving.
Yeah. Well, my prayer and my hope is that I will always be humble about all these things,
Mhm.
because I know myself, Richard.
Mhm.
I know that there's something inside here that wants to be arrogant, that wants to, that wants to win. And I constantly have to keep that under control. And since I'm a Christian, I ask God to help me keep that under control, to keep me humble. Um, but even if I wasn't a Christian, I hope that I would still have that impulse to want to make sure that I don't get arrogant. I don't get to the point where I just think that my thinking is superior to other people's thinking, and therefore I always have to be right. I mean, I um, it's a danger that I think that we all face, and I think this is one of the dangers that you have recognized, and that's part of your work, is to point that out. So may I always be humble, and if I cease to be humble, I want you to call me out on it, please.
Okay, yeah, and
Please.
I have the same hope, and I don't have a guide to ask, so I just guess I hope I ask the universe for the same wisdom,
Yeah, yeah.
or I ask
Well,
random chaos. I, I praise out to random chaos that remain humble.
okay. Well, I hope the random chaos will grant that prayer.
Yeah, me too.
So do you, we're coming up on the 2 hour mark. Do you have any thoughts to share to kind of close us up a
I'm
little bit?
I'm glad I took notes because I was looking through my notes and I think I've checked off everything that came up from our
Okay,
talk.
great. Okay, great. Well, I want this to be, and I know that you have plenty of platforms, to articulate your ideology. But I want this to be another platform. I want to give you the gift of being able to hear you speak on my platform, on my humble little platform here.
With the great guitar work.
Yeah. Um, I want this to be a forum where you can speak.
Thank
And
you.
I believe that every time I address the things that you say, I believe that you're listening. I believe that you're taking it seriously.
Mhm.
And so I want to share that forum, and I want to share together um, this platform, and being able to compete in the free marketplace of ideas. And that's one thing that I appreciate about just about where we live. So far we're still able to say what's on our minds, and we're still able to come to the table, and we're able to argue with each other, and
Mhm.
we're able to challenge each other. uh, I think that's extremely valuable. So far, we don't have a government that's shutting that down.
Right. So far.
So far, yeah.
Mhm.
So I want this to be a platform for you, and I appreciate how your eloquence in sharing all these things. And I think that I think you would challenge me and to keep thinking about these things, to keep considering them, and to consider other views. And I want to do that. And I think that you take it seriously when I want to challenge you to keep considering these other views and to keep thinking about them. So that's what I like about you, Richard.
Thank you.
I wish I not only wish that more atheists were like you, I wish more Christians were like you.
Thank you. We talked about this before. There's a reason why people become arrogant and loud, and hopefully, I'm preaching the message about why that happens, and more people will catch it and try to change.
Yep. Yeah. Absolutely. Um, I've got some comments from my lovely wife, and I don't think that we're going to have time to go through them. But what I would like to do is make a note of them, and
Mhm.
perhaps we can bring up these comments sometime in the future. I feel bad that we kind of run out of time. I didn't want to go beyond the 2 hour mark, but I do want to bring up what she says. As I have stated before, I consider her a partner in ministry. She is behind me 100%, and that means a great deal to me. So all these comments from Lori are worth addressing, and I feel bad that we don't have the time at the moment. So
Well, this will be our part four. Our part four can be questions from the audience or whoever else.
yeah, and I don't really see any questions other than
Oh, just comments. I see.
yeah, I just see comments.
Okay.
So I would like to, but I don't want to neglect Lori's comments. It's just that
We'll turn it into a question. We'll say, "What do you think about the comment that this?" And then you repeat her comment.
yeah, right,
Okay.
exactly. We can turn it into a question. I don't know if you saw any of them.
I can't from here. All I see is the software. I don't see
Oh,
the.
that's right.
Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, she said the natural world is doing what it was set in motion to do, and I think that's an interesting theistic comment. Obviously, she's a Christian. She says Acts 17:28, in him we live and move and have our being. For in him we live and move and even exist, even as some of your own poets have said. Um, and so I like these scriptures. The Bible is not bereft of philosophical content.
Right. There's a lot of even as an atheist, I think that the people who wrote that down were genuinely thinking this is something that God wants me to say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and there's a lot of argumentation in the Bible. There's a lot of logical arguments
Mm-hmm.
uh, that exist in the Bible. Jesus made logical arguments. Paul made logical arguments, and so I would encourage any Christian who thinks that the Bible is actually counterindicative of reasoning and logic. They should reconsider that. Because there's tons of rationality in the Bible, where the biblical authors argue for certain conclusions and so on. All right. Thank you very, very much. I appreciate it.
And thanks for having me. This has been we're 3 for 3 now. We've had 3 great conversations.
Yeah. And I consider you a new friend, and I appreciate you a whole lot.
Thank you.
I definitely enjoy this, and I hope that we can continue it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So hope I haven't said anything that makes you want to not continue it.
No, I'm looking forward to it. We'll do it some more.
Yeah. Okay. All right. We're going to sign off, and thank you very much. And we will talk again soon. All right.